welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. I hope you all tuned in last week to hear my collab with Stu from British Murders, and as always, we had a blast recording together. We typically record 2 episodes at once, and I was a guest host on his show as well, where I told the story of Donald Pee Wee Gaskins. So if you haven't yet, hop on over to British Murders and check it out. This week, I'm back to recording solo, and I have my first audio recording suggestion.
Hi everyone, my name is Missy Ames, and I'm originally from the New Bethlehem, Pennsylvania area. I went to school with Bobby, and my suggestion for her story for this week is the story of Mary Bell, the Tyneside Strangler.
Missy is one of my biggest supporters, and she listens to every episode. She's recommended a few cases in the past, not to mention she's the one who made my custom Killer Stories t-shirts. Thanks for being awesome, Missy. I'm just going to take a moment now to go over this since some of you may skip over the end of my episodes. As always, you can write in your story suggestions. But if you would like to send in a voice recording of your story suggestion like Missy, just email it to killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. If you're enjoying Killer Stories and you listen on Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave me a review. It's been a while since I've begged for a review, but it really does help my podcast grow. As Missy suggested, this week I'm covering the story of Mary Bell. Trigger warning, the victims in this case are very young children. I have featured episodes with young victims before, but the difference this time is that the killer herself is also a child. Mary was born May 26, 1957, in the neighborhood of Scotswood, which is located in the city of Newcastle upon Tyne in northeast England. Her mother, Betty McCricket, was just 16 when she had Mary. It's unknown who her actual father is, but she took the name of the most recent man in Betty's life, Billy Bell. Neither Betty or Billy were receiving any Parent of the Year award. Billy was a known criminal and ended up in prison for armed robbery. And I swear this is deja vu from last week's story I told on Stu's podcast. From the moment Mary was born, Betty reportedly stated, "Take that thing away from me." She played a very little role in the lives of her 2 daughters, leaving them to fend for themselves. She traveled to a more populated area of Glasgow where she worked as a prostitute and was rarely home. She emotionally, physically, and sexually abused her children. She once sold Mary. Yes, you heard that right, sold her daughter to a mentally unstable woman who was unable to have her own child. Betty came across her hanging outside of an abortion clinic. She was there to beg people not to have an abortion and let her have their babies. Mary's older sister walked across town to get her and bring her home. Betty would solicit Mary to her clients, making money off allowing people to sexually assault her starting when she was just 4 years old. This is what Donald Pee Wee Gaskins, my story from last week, experienced as a child as well. I just cannot even imagine doing this to your child. It's the most sickening act. And honestly, no wonder these kids have severe psychological issues. Betty even attempted to kill Mary by pushing her out of a window. Mary suffered brain damage from her injuries, but she survived the fall. The damage was to her prefrontal cortex of her brain. And for your information, this area controls the capacity of decision making. Betty also gave her sleeping pills and told her it was candy. Mary overdosed and was hospitalized, but she survived the incident. There are several theories I came across in my research regarding this. One is that Betty was attempting to kill Mary. Another is Munchausen by proxy. And I don't think this is the case because Betty didn't give 2 shits about Mary. And Munchausen by proxy is purposefully causing harm to someone else, bringing attention to you as their loving, helpful caregiver. She probably couldn't even pretend to be a caring mother. That sounds like too much work for a despicable human like Betty McCricket. Another source said it was actually attempted suicide on Mary's part. And given her horrible home life, it's possible, but she was so young at the time of these events, I'm going to guess it was Betty's attempt at getting rid of her. It doesn't sound like she ever really wanted her anyways. I mean, she sold her to a mentally unstable woman, for God's sake. Mary started exhibiting strange behavior and aggression at school. Her teacher said she was very smart, but it was obvious she didn't have any remorse for her bullying. She made friends with a girl who was a few years older than her, Norma Bell. There was no relation, just coincidentally they had the same last name. Even though Norma was older, Mary was most definitely the ringleader. Norma was described as having a learning disability and was easily swayed by Mary into mischief. Mary's activity escalates from bullying to something much worse. She had her friend Norma hold another girl down while Mary filled her mouth with sand. They nearly suffocated her. May 11th of 1968, Mary and Norma were playing with a 3-year-old boy. I know times were different, but where are this child's parents? Even I grew up in a time where you wake up, you say good morning to your parents, and you go do what you please as long as you're back by dinner. But 3 years old? No way am I letting a 3-year-old leave the house unsupervised. Well, Mary, Norma, and this 3-year-old boy were on top of an air raid shelter, which is a small building that was created for people to hide for protection during an air attack. From the pictures that I see online, the top of the building was probably rounded. The boy fell. You can't see my air quotes. He fell and was severely injured. Mary Bell's presence at this accident led other moms to come forward to police. More than 3 other young girls had told their parents that Mary tried to strangle them. Police spoke with Mary and scolded her for her behavior. No charges were made against her. The stern talking to the police gave Mary didn't do any good. May 25th, the day before Mary's 11th birthday, she lured 4-year-old Martin Brown into an abandoned house. Once she got him in there, she strangled him to death. Then she left him and ran back to tell her friend Norma what she had done. When the pair returned to the house, they saw a group of boys entering the home. It must be the cool thing to do, explore abandoned houses. The boys discovered the body of 4-year-old Martin Brown. He was lying face down in an upstairs bedroom. At the crime scene, the only thing noted was a small amount of blood and saliva on his lips. Because Mary was such a small person, there weren't obvious signs of strangulation. Near his body, there was an empty bottle of painkillers. It was assumed the young boy took the pills and overdosed. His death was ruled an accident. I can't find any information about who the meds were prescribed to. Usually that's listed on the pill bottle. If it's an abandoned house where kids hung out, the pill bottle was probably trash left over from a little party. Like I said, Martin's death was ruled an accident. 4 days after his death, Mary showed up to the Brown home. Martin's mother answered the door. Mary asked if she could see Martin. His mother explained to Mary that he had died. She says, "Oh, I know. I just wanted to see him in his coffin." Martin's mother was extremely disturbed by her request and shut the door in her face. Mary bragged about killing Martin Brown while at school, but she was known as a manipulative liar and no one believed her claims. Mary and Norma continued to spend their free time creating mischief. They broke into a nursery and left incriminating notes inside. Some sources called it a nursery school and another listed it as a garden center, also referred to as a nursery. Not sure which is correct, so I'm just going to call it a nursery. The notes were essentially an anonymous confession to the murder of Martin Brown. I'm going to read you some of the notes as written. Quote, "Futch of, we murder, watch out, Fanny and faggot, and we did murder Martin Brown, fuck of, you bastard." Unquote. Pretty foul language for an 11-year-old. but very few words are actually spelled correctly in these notes. FYI, fanny means something different to Brits than it does in the States. It's not a cute word for your butt or the little bag worn around your waist. There, fanny is a term for vagina. After the nursery was vandalized, they installed an alarm system with cameras. Mary and Norma returned a few days later. A security officer approached them, but they had only been loitering outside. The girls denied having anything to do with the vandalism, and their parents were called to come pick them up. 3 months after the incident, Mary and Norma struck again. They took 3-year-old Brian Howe to a secluded area and strangled him to death. The girls left and later returned to the body. Norma used a razor blade to carve a capital letter N into his stomach. Mary shoved her out of the way and used a pair of scissors to turn the N into an M. She cut off a chunk of Brian's hair, and then the girls used their blades to make small cuts on his stomach and legs. Mary mutilated his genitals using the scissors. So disturbing that an 11-year-old girl is capable of this behavior. The girls covered up his body with a pile of concrete rocks. The Howe family grew very concerned when they couldn't find their 3-year-old son. Brian's older sister decided to look for him around the neighborhood. Mary and Norma step up and offer to help look for her. They walk right past the pile of concrete blocks that was covering his little body. Mary points to it as if they should check it out. Norma says there's no way he's in there, and the 3 girls continue their search. But his body was there. Brian was eventually discovered, and the cause of his death was strangulation. However, the amount of pressure that was used signifies that his murderer was a child. Now that the police know their suspect is a child, Martin Brown's case was reopened and looked at as a possible strangulation as well. Local children were interviewed by police. Mary and Norma both claimed innocence when questioned about the murders, but both were acting very strange and stood out to the police. Norma seemed eager to talk during the questioning, and Mary was vague and misleading. It wasn't until their second set of interviews that Mary said something damning. She all of a sudden remembered seeing Brian the day of his death. She said she witnessed an 8-year-old boy strike him with a rock and was carrying a pair of scissors. The media was not informed on the details of the boy's mutilation. The fact that scissors were used was only known by the investigative team and the killer, or killers. Norma loses it. She breaks down and says that Mary is the one who strangled Brian. Funny thing is, in the other room, Mary is trying to pin it on Norma. In the end, both girls were arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. Court psychiatrists say that Mary Bell was, quote, intelligent, manipulative, and dangerous. They say she showed classic signs of psychopathy, and on December 17, 1968, she was found guilty on 2 counts of manslaughter. Diminished responsibility was the defense used to lower the sentencing from murder to manslaughter. This allows the judge to give out sentencing in a mental health facility versus punishment in prison if he sees fit. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which means an undetermined amount of time. Basically, you're going to go to prison until we say so. Sounds like when I'm really mad at my son and say, go to your room until I tell you to come out. In the moment, I'm not sure what length of time is a suitable punishment. And I'm sure at her young age, her sentencing would depend on her behavior in prison. At first, she was sent to a juvenile detention center called Red Bank Secure Unit. Here is where children, both boys and girls, who committed serious offenses like murder, rape, and arson were housed. Norma was acquitted from the murder charges, while she was along with Mary and played a role in the post-mortem mutilation of Brian Howe. She did not commit murder. Mary is the one who strangled both Martin Brown and Brian Howe. Mary's mother, Betty, just couldn't help but use this situation as a way to make money. She sold stories about Mary to the press. She was headline news across the country. She also sold writings claiming they were written by Mary, which I'm sure was a hoax. Honestly, I'm not surprised. That's a terrible thing, but it's nothing compared to selling your child as a sex slave. In 1976, Mary was in the process of being moved from the juvenile detention center to an adult prison. In the meantime, she was staying in an open prison. In an open prison, you have a lot more freedom, very limited supervision. You are even allowed to leave the grounds if you have a job. They exist for those who have a low risk to society. After living a year in the open prison, Mary Bell escaped with another inmate. They were only out for 3 days before their capture. She made the most of her 3 days of freedom. She found herself a couple of boys and lost her virginity. Well, her first real sexual encounter, not counting the rape she endured as a child. Her punishment for the escape? She lost her open prison privileges for 28 days. If that's the risk, 28 days of being locked in a cell instead of walking around freely, I would try to escape too. Can't blame her there. Last week's story had a prison escape too. It tacked on 9 months to his prison sentencing, and I thought that was light punishment. She was transferred to HM, which I think stands for Her Majesty, Prison Askham Grange. She served 12 years there and was released on probation in 1980. She was 23 years old. Because Mary Bell was so well known in the media, she was granted a new identity. But for some reason, she decided to stay in the area of Newcastle upon Tyne. In 1984, Mary had a baby girl. I couldn't find any information about a husband or a father to the baby. I'm going to assume she raised her as a single mother. Mary's daughter knew nothing about her morbid history until 1998. This is when Mary was discovered by the media. They found out her new identity, where she was living, and surrounded her home. Mary and her daughter covered their heads with bedsheets and ran to the car to escape the media frenzy. Can you imagine? You're 14 years old, just sitting at the table eating breakfast, and all of a sudden reporters are banging on your windows and doors. Your mom turns to you and says, "Sorry, honey, I'm actually an infamous child murderer." Talk about turning your world upside down. Mary had been granted anonymity. I have a lot of trouble with that word. I've literally practiced it like 100 times, so if I'm saying it wrong, I'm sorry. Bear with me. When her daughter was born, she was to be protected with anonymity as well until the age of 18. After Mary was exposed to the media in 1988, she went to high court to fight for life extension of anonymity for her daughter. She won, and any court order to permanently protect someone's identity is now known as the Mary Bell Order in England. The current whereabouts of Mary Bell is unknown. That's it for Mary Bell, the 11-year-old Tyneside strangler. I don't want people to think I have sympathy for murderers. They do deserve to pay for their crimes. But I hate hearing stories like this where if Mary's mother, Betty, was a half-decent human, maybe Martin Brown and Brian Howe would still be alive today. Be sure to follow me on social media to see more details on the cases I cover. Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Killer Stories Podcast. Twitter is at Killer Stories PC. If you visit my link tree in the show notes, you can find the link for buymeacoffee.com, where you can show your support with a one-time donation, or you can click the link to shop my merchandise store. It's warming up outside, and I have some really cute Killer Stories tank tops in there. As always, thanks for listening. Until next time, this has been a Killer Story.